I've got one of my best mates on, Gary, who we'll be chatting to soon, and I'll introduce him properly in a minute. We were chin wagging so much that James had to interrupt us, and just before air, we both went like that, just to say, "Oh no, we got to go. We got to do the show. We better stop enjoying each other's company and do the show." But this is the Wellbeing Show. It's a Wednesday, the 12th of April, and it is 9 p.m. UK time. And I think it's 6 a.m. Australia time where Gary is, or one of the time zones. Certainly the time zone Gary's in is 6 a.m. Because they're upside down under. So they do everything upside down, the wrong way around, as far as I'm concerned. But it's I'm saying the time and day because that means it's live if you're listening to it in the correct time zone, the correct day. So it'd be lovely to hear from you. The number's 07 506 319 745. That's +44 7 506 319 745. Drop me a WhatsApp. And if it's interesting enough, if you're interesting enough, I'll get you on air, but only if you're interesting enough. But that, of course, doesn't count to me. I don't have to be interesting enough, and I'm definitely not. But my guest is Mr. Gary W. Denson. I never knew what the W is. I should have asked years ago. What is the W for?
Oh, it's really important. Wayne.
Wayne. Gary Wayne.
I always said to my parents, really? But anyway.
Yeah, mine's Daniel.
Yeah, well, that Daniel there. That's
Daniel McDermott. It's like, Danny Boy. There you go.
Yeah.
After the famous Irish song, "Oh, Danny Boy." I don't think it was written for me, though, to be honest.
Yeah.
Good to have you with us. Thanks for getting up so early.
Pleasure.
Yeah, you're off out today, aren't you? Off somewhere?
Yeah, we're doing after we finish the show, we're going to just jump in the car and do a quick drive up to Sydney and a nice 10-hour trip. So
I was going to say in Australian terms, it's going to be a couple of weeks fighting off giant crocodiles. No, see, actually, the spiders down there that are far more frightening than the crocodiles. Crocodiles are quite easy in comparison to some of the spiders you've got down there.
Yeah, there's been a few. There's been a few crocodile attacks recently. So one guy was able to extricate himself by poking his thumbs into the crocodile's eyes. So he was one of the few that actually get away. So
glad you told me that, because I'm going to the park tomorrow. And just in case there's a croc in the pond.
I don't think there's too many saltwater ponds in London, are there?
That's right. But I'm ready with my thumbs to poke its eyes out. It's one of those things, isn't it? People say, how to stop a grizzly bear from eating you? You put your arm down its throat. I don't know. I think that's a really bad place to be. I don't know anybody who survived that one, really.
Well, you know what they say about surviving a grizzly bear attack. If you're in a group, you've just got to be faster than the last person, right?
You just got to throw somebody else at it. Yeah, eat me best mate. Okay. Well, I'm really glad that you're back on the show. It's been a while since I've seen you. And our relationship goes back a number of years now.
It does,
Really long time ago. And I've met your wife as well,
yes.
who's an amazing woman. And not met your sons yet, but one day we'll see. But maybe that will. And we met as professionals.
Yes,
some years ago. But your life has really shifted from that time, and we can go back and talk about that, but let's maybe catch up with your sort of the sort of reason why you've come back on the show, really. So I've known you for a long time. I know you before this period of time, but there was what happened was you developed cancer, right?
Yes.
And that's really what we're going to talk about. It's that sort of story, and then we'll go backwards in time a little bit and add in other elements if that's all right. But so I knew you as this strong, fit and healthy bloke who was globe-trotting businessman running companies left, right and centre. And then we got this news that Gary has cancer. And I still can't help myself, even though it's not true anymore, that cancer is not a death sentence, right? I'm still old enough to remember that it did mean that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It isn't. What was it? But what was it like for you when you were given the diagnosis you've got cancer? I mean, I presume that sort of thought must have gone through your head a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I was the CEO for a British insurance company in Singapore at the time, and I'd only been there a few months, and I found this lump on my left side under the skin, interestingly, and it was melanoma cancer. So it wasn't like a dark mole or a strange growth on the skin. It was under the skin, which is odd. So I had that out, and it very soon the pathology confirmed that it was melanoma cancer. But what had happened, coincidentally, I'd end up becoming extremely ill about 2 weeks after that. Actually, I just accepted an award for the company on customer service, and I got off stage, and I was all of a sudden I couldn't walk. I was crippled, bent over, and turns out that I'd already gone from 0 to stage 4 because this small growth under the skin hadn't been detected. It was only about the size of a jelly bean, but in that time, everything else was progressing and working, and it worked to create 2 huge orange-sized metastases on my adrenal glands, and they subsequently then found out I had 7 or 8 other growths inside the body already. So that was a bit of a shock. But Kerry and I sat down and said, right, we'll have a go at this. So I end up resigning and returning back to Australia because it's renowned as being the place to try and fix skin cancer. Hello.
Yeah. We wonder why.
Yeah. And so clearly my childhood growing up in the country and playing sport, cricket, out fishing, water skiing, crayfishing, camping, and back in the 60s and 70s, there wasn't a really big focus on sun protection like there is today.
No, that's right. Because I remember me and my brother got sunburned, like 3rd-degree burns, but that was what you did. Chamomile lotion. You didn't have any sunblock or anything. No. Like the idea was you went and got burned. Eventually, you'd get over the burns and you'd be all right. These days, doctors would absolutely freak if a child came in and told them that's what the advice was. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So primary school kids now must, if they go out into the play yard, they must have a big floppy hat, and be covered. So, which is, that's great. So it all started to spiral downhill. I was on immunotherapy trials, and they didn't really seem to be happening. So around about July 2020, they said, look, you best get your affairs in order. There's nothing more we can do for you. And so we dutifully did that, but we didn't give up. And I kept pressing on and actually ended up getting onto another immunotherapy trial through the Alfred Hospital. And then I had a severe bowel obstruction because I had a couple of growths in the bowel, and ended up in hospital. And that's where they said, look, you've got 90 days, we think. So you can either go home and sit on the balcony and chew on crushed ice, or we can try and do some surgery, but you may not wake up, or even if you do come out of the surgery, you still might only have 90 days because you're at high risk of infection and your immune system is struggling, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's really where I decided I'd like to try and raise some money for the Alfred Foundation, which is the charitable arm of the hospital. And so I thought, well, if I've got 90 days, I'll try and raise $90,000,
As you do.
So the interesting thing is I was looking at it and chatting to them, because we still do a few things every now and again together. And I think we're just on $400,000. So they're quite happy, and I'm quite happy to still be here to be able to do it.
So. How many days has it been now? Past the 90?
Yeah, so let me see. That was September through to December of 2020. So just over 2 years. Yeah, so 2 and a bit years now. So
yeah. I'm intrigued. What was it? Because like when you get a diagnosis like that, and literally you were told, we don't know if you're going to make it through this, sort your life out, bring your affairs in order, make sure you've written your will and all that sort of stuff. But, even for an individual just to come to terms with that and accept it and decide that they're going to go and eat the crushed ice is cool enough, right? That yes. Just, not to end up over the cliff edge and just carry on and sort of make sense of that. But you went further. You said, right, I've got 90 days. I'm going to raise some money. I'm not going to just sort of, which I know is typical of you as a person. That's your way. But I'm interested. I'm intrigued by this capacity that some people have to transform an experience and decide, not necessarily to fight back, but to just, this is not how I want to be defined. I want to be defined in another way, and I'm going to define me by some act. So I'm thinking about people like I know there's someone called Elizabeth who set up a charity called Drug Fam because one of her twin sons died because of his heroin use, probably suicide. But rather than just get back to her life and survive that, she decided to write a book about it, turn that into a play, turn it into a charity, helping other. She transformed that experience, and it seems to me similar types of people. Was that always you? Is that because you?
Yeah.
What is it about? Yeah. Why did you respond?
Yeah, I was the small town I grew up in northern Victoria, farming, orchards and wheat farms and cattle farms and on the Murray River, which is the biggest river in Australia, and that's the food bowl of Australia essentially. And so growing up in that small town, for whatever reason, I developed this philosophy or this approach that I'd always try and put myself into a bigger pond, as I like to describe it. So a town of 2,500 people when I was growing up, it's probably about 6,000-7,000 now, but that's 60 years ago. So when I was there, it was a small town, but a big town relative to the rural region, if you like. And so my view was, all right, well, I'll try and step into a bigger pond. So out of my siblings, I was the 3 other siblings. I was the one that went to university because I wanted to have that experience and live in Melbourne and work there. With my sport, I went from playing in one major Aussie rules football league to a larger major Aussie rules football league, and did pretty well in both of those. Ended up in representative sides, that sort of thing. So it was always this urge to try and step into another pond, and that's what led to me with my career. And I ended up accepting a role to go and live and work in Jakarta back in '97. We only had the one child then, and so that was Jakarta for a year, then Singapore for 10 years, and then Bangkok for 5 years, and then back to Singapore ultimately again before I became ill. So it was really just that belief that you put yourself in an uncomfortable position, I suppose, and see if you can work out to develop skills or an attitude to be comfortable there. And I was fortunate with.
Was it an attitude from either of your parents, or what happened with your other siblings? Did they sort of do that as well? Is it?
No, the other siblings were my only brother, younger brother, he ended up working in the family business until he was 40, mid-40s or so. My elder sister, she was in the family business. She married and started her family early, and her eldest son's just turned 40 late last year. So, and she's only 18 months older than me. So she went down that path, but she and her husband have become quite successful in their own business, right? So, and my younger sister, she got out of the pond also, but she went up into Queensland with a local lad, and they're married, and so, I wouldn't say they had that same mindset that I was driven by. And look,
it's interesting. I mean, my experience was I moved out of my family culture, and that was necessary for me. And I had, there were people that inspired me, oddly enough. So there were a few blokes like Mandela was one of them. Somebody I really latched onto. That story I found intriguing and interesting, and Mahatma Gandhi was another one, oddly enough. Something about those two guys, they were inspirational to me because they'd had these serious struggles, and the obvious result of those types of struggles might have been to get into violence and aggression and fight, but the way they dealt with injustice was to try and put things right. And I found that quite inspirational, really, as a concept and a story, and that sort of resonated with me. Was there anything like, you were nodding about those people, you know those characters, obviously, but was there anything absolutely like that in your life, those sort of inspirations? And
I had an uncle, my dad's older brother, and he was a big influence on me. He seemed to have a very positive outlook. He was heavily involved in community and always was successful in his business, insurance, believe it or not. He always was giving back to the community in one way or another. So I think he had a big impact on me. But I think I really, if I boil it down, I think I was just always fascinated about other cultures and other lifestyles, and just wanted to see what it was like to be part of that. And so through my career, I was very fortunate. I was able to sit in meetings in downtown New York. I was in the tallest tower of Philadelphia when 9/11 struck, and that was a story in itself, getting out of there because we thought that one of the planes was heading for the
absolutely,
the city of Liberty, and so you're lots of visits to London. So I just thoroughly enjoy meeting different people and different cultures and different experiences, and I suppose that's just having a love of life.
Yeah, you moved into insurance, didn't you? Which again, people have a characterization of insurance and sales, but you moved right up to the top of your field, didn't you? I mean, that was sort of, you went sky high, literally. Again, what was the sort of motivation for that? That same sense of wanting the challenge, or?
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to see how far I could take that, and my original aspiration, when the reason I went to uni was to learn how to do business, but to come back and run the family business. And but that didn't happen. I made a significant strategic mistake back, as I look at it now, Noel, because my father's a twin, and he and his twin brother started doing business together, cutting down peppercorn trees when they were 14 and 15, and they ended up with a very successful timber yard, department store, truss and framing business, and all of the verticals, I suppose, of building. And I really thought I'd like to come back and take that to another level. But I learned too late in the game that whilst Dad was very supportive of that, he'd never actually discussed it with his brother. So when I said at the grand age of 26, righto, Dad, I'm ready to step up, oh, well, sorry, your uncle's not comfortable with shifting the balance of the two of us. So that's when I packed up and went back to Melbourne and started career in insurance. Yeah, so.
Yeah. And you globetrot with that career. You had a family. Tell us about that. What was that like for you traveling?
Oh, the whole travel was a great experience. So Scott was born in Australia, but he ended up with us in Jakarta when he was just turning 4. And we still talk about that. He can recall different bits and pieces of how crazy that was. And, the stories of when you're driving through Jakarta, make sure you have all the doors locked, because there were stories of kids being snatched out of cars, and then they'd hold you to ransom, and then you make sure you didn't run over a dog accidentally, because everyone would come out and claim it was their dog, and that you'd have to pay all of them for knocking down their dog. And so that's fascinating. And then Singapore for 10 years. Well, that was wonderful. The whole Chinese culture and Malay culture there too.
Yeah.
So it was really enjoyable.
It's interesting because Australia is like that. It's more on the Asian side of things, and sort of straddles European and Asian culture, doesn't it?
Well, it does. Yeah, clearly we're a British colony originally, and Australia certainly has struggled to fit into Asia in a lot of ways, because it's a very different culture. Every Asian country has its own culture, even though we categorize it as being Asia, but they're all very different. Yeah. So and then Thailand again was fascinating, because it's a little more like Jakarta, I suppose, versus Singapore, which is one of the richest countries in the world now, so per capita. So, that was rustic but exciting. And so the 2 younger boys grew up firstly in Singapore, but then Thailand or Bangkok. Yeah, so it's good fun.
And do the boys appreciate that sort of globe-trotting life? I mean, has it affected them in a positive way, do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. Scott's now living and working in Barcelona. So I think there's a statistic that there's a 66 or 7% chance that your children will end up as expats. So Scott's already ticked that box. He's been living and working there for 3 or 4 years, and loving it. And the other 2, Hugo's just got back from 10 days in Vietnam. He and 2 other mates decided they were going to head off there and just travel around. And so Jesse's.
Would you say you're close to your boys? Do you feel close to them? Do they feel close to you, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've gone through, Dad's the fuddy-duddy bloke that doesn't understand a lot, that maybe that's the mid to later teens. And
pretty accurate description of you.
Yeah, exactly. So, but no, look, I think we have a very close relationship. And
the reason I'm asking is because it's often the case that how men define success, and you definitely are a successful man, may not include the success in terms of stable family and fathering, bringing up your kids and being part of their life. And that's you and I personally have talked about these things, because you've watched my fumbling attempts at being a dad, and been very supportive and very kind of all of that. Well, we've talked about that a lot, but
far from fumbling, Noel. You've done a brilliant job there. And look, I think we have some similarities there, because certainly when I got divorced, gosh, what's that? Almost 10 years ago now. That certainly presented a lot of challenges between their mother and I, and the boys would go through different stages where, depending on the story they were getting at any given time, that they might think, all right, well, I'll put a bit of space between Dad. But my learning was that you've always got to be there, whether they want you to be there or not, but always be there. And that eventually, they'll get to an age where they'll put things in perspective. And, I always say you don't get married till you get divorced, but certainly having your kids grow up in an unhappy marriage, I don't think is good parenting either. And
I think the evidence is with you on that one. But again, we're of a similar generation. The idea of co-parenting is a relatively modern concept. It certainly wasn't around when I was growing up. And when my parents got divorced, it was very unpleasant. I mean, actually, for us kids, it was a relief because they weren't knocking lumps out of each other anymore. Like, I remember my dad saying to me, you kids adjusted to this divorce really well. He was like, I didn't say it, but in my head, it was like, no, it's a lot better this way, actually, mate. It's definitely a lot better this way. It's a lot more peaceful. I didn't say it to him, so you wouldn't. But that idea of, particularly for guys, and I'm going to come back to this subject because I'm going to ignore your sort of downplaying phlegmatic Australian bloke approach and prod a little bit more. It's certainly at that time, this co-parenting was not a concept at all, and also definitely was not modeled for men to be actively involved as fathers. And certainly in a divorce, the assumption would have been the kids would go off with mum, that would be it, and dad would pay his money, and that was it, right? And particularly, and I think this is really interesting to me, particularly men who are extremely successful in business, which you were, and you always have been. You're one of those sort of real high flyers in your field, whatever field that you've gone into, whether it be insurance or addiction work or currently fundraising for a hospital. You're very successful when you decide to do something. But I'm intrigued as to, because you were ploughing a furrow in many ways for guys, this maintaining contact with your sons, understanding that you were important in their life as a dad.
And
where do you think that came from, you know?
Yeah, look, I was fortunate my dad was always around to an extent. I look back and his focus was very much on work and being the provider. So there were times when clearly I would have liked that he was able to come along and watch me play sport and succeed at that. But work was a priority, and I completely respect that because that was his belief system, that you had to first provide, and then things came after that. So I think that was important. And as I said, he was always around, and he and mum had a great relationship all the way through. Because my first marriage fell apart, it became a real challenge to have that presence, even though you physically couldn't be there. And I just worked at that. I got advice from an excellent counsellor here that she just kept reassuring me to turn up, and that didn't mean physically. That just meant be there. And I think that was a great piece of advice, and also to try and live by that mantra that you're the adult here. So don't become petulant, don't become overly emotional, and certainly you go home and you think, gee, this is tough, and I don't understand why I've been blacked out, and there's no communication. But invariably, for example, with young Hugo, when he was a couple of years younger, he living with his mum, he was getting so much grief from his mum about his dad that the best way he could deal with it was to be able to say, Mum, I haven't spoken to Dad in 6 months, right? And therefore he would shut down that attack, if you like. It took me a while to come to realise that was his strategy of coping, his mechanism to cope. And it wasn't all about me that, whoa, what have I done? I'm a good dad. Why is he blocking me out? But that was his way of shutting down any conflict at home with his mum. So, yeah, you've sort of really got to step back and reflect.
Yeah, you were clear, even though it was hurting, that you couldn't attack, that you just had to remain stable and available and present in the way that you could be present. Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. I mean, there are some parallels in terms of, the way I've been involved in my son's life, and when his mum split up when we split up. I mean, she wasn't anti me,
No.
but it was difficult, and there's also a physical divide because he lives in a different country and
Sure.
and various things. So that stuff around how are you available and present when you're not physically there.
Yes.
I guess I think it's a theme that many men who've gone through splits can resonate with, because it's a really complicated one to do. It's a really complicated emotional sort of flip-flop to do. How am I available? How can I be present when I'm physically not there? I might be in a different country. I might, or there's no communication. So you sort of counter, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm a great believer in getting outside advice, because quite simply, it's going to be objective, right? And they're the ones that are able to say, look, I think, Gary, that you're getting too wound up over this, and let's just talk through that, because where is it actually getting you to? To what end is that behavior achieving? And I relied heavily on that, and in fact, we still keep in touch. We caught up and had a coffee just as friends about a month ago. So I strongly recommend that you find someone you can talk to, and look, it may well be a mate, but a mate may not necessarily have that objective viewpoint. They may come from a slightly skewed or influenced angle because they're a mate, and give you a different perspective that may not necessarily be the best. And going through this cancer journey, it's really, I'm toying with the idea. I've got a journal of sorts, and I'm toying with the idea of writing a book. And as the title to today's program was, "I'll Stop Living When I'm Dead." But a significant part of the motivation of how to approach this journey of staying alive, if you like, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for modern medical science. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. But the message I wanted to share was everything I do is looking at it from the position of, how would my sons observe this behavior? Wow. And so I know that one's 30, one's 24, one's 22. I know that statistically they're going to go through hardship, whether it's mental stress or challenges, or physical, as in mine, something that comes out of left field. You're fit and healthy, and at the age of 58, you're diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and you think, well, what's going on here? Where's this come from, and why is it me? I never had that attitude, but I felt it was important that the boys saw that you get up every day and you work the problem. And that's my philosophy. You just, whatever you're capable of at any given time, you work the problem. You don't sit back and go, woe is me, why has this happened to me? Because that doesn't help anyone. And invariably you're going to have loved ones, be it family or your partner. I think it's important that you show strength to them as best you can. And
yeah. I mean, people have their own ways and all that, but we're talking about you. And I guess you must have talked to your sons about this and sort of and got their sort of take on it. Where are they coming from in all of this, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think they often say we're enormously proud and of your dad, and they've been through that journey with me. What was it, September 2020, when I had that first major bowel resection, and they said, you've got 90 days. Jesse would walk along with me. I had a walking stick, and he would congratulate me for walking 50 meters, and then I'd have to go and rest. So today I can push out about 8 kilometers. So
are you still doing that? the swimming every day, because that's sort of
the swimming I've slowed off a little bit on that because when the recent bowel obstruction I had in January this year, you just need to let everything sort of settle down there. But I did get back into it last year before that, and it's certainly on the agenda again, because that is a wonderful, wonderful pursuit, because whether people realize it or not, but when you're swimming, you've got to breathe. One, critical. And
it's helpful.
Two, you're breathing in a rhythmic manner. So it's very similar to meditation, right? But you're getting a physical workout from it. That's how I look at it. So this constant rhythmic breathing means that your mind has to go to a place of calm, and before you know it, I always know when I've got there, because I can't remember whether I've done 40 laps or 20. But that's fine. I just swim for an hour. So
no, I know the feeling.
I
mean, it's interesting to me because it's sort of the way you're talking about things is, I mean, there are a couple of themes I think that are emerging for me. One is that you have some sense of the bigger picture and a bigger purpose, that you're not just doing self-motivated stuff or ego-motivated stuff. There's a reason for it. Either it's your kids, or it's give back to the community, or there's a bigger purpose and meaning there, which is always, the literature is quite clear, the research is quite clear on that sort of people who have a bigger picture or bigger purpose transform things. Well, I think it's part of positive psychology.
And look, if you're fortunate enough to have children, or you choose to have a responsibility for them, then I really strongly believe that you need to then try and set examples and give them some live instances of getting up each day, literally, and doing the best you can. I was struck down by myelitis last May, June. And that's apparently where my immune system was so heightened that it ended up attacking not only the cancerous growths, but it ended up attacking my eyes, my heart, my lungs, and all of my body muscles.
Autoimmune response,
So I end up losing, I think, 14 kilos in 2 weeks back then. And for a guy of my size, 6'3", 6'4".
You are pretty much of a giant. You can't afford to lose weight, maybe.
No, but they were saying that because it attacked my lungs, I would normally have a lung capacity of 4.5, 5 litres, and it was down to 1.3. And so, I couldn't breathe. I was oxygenated, couldn't get myself up or off the toilet, didn't have the strength, couldn't pick up the dog that weighed 8 kilos. But again, you work back. My goal was always 50 meters, and then the next day you go to 60, and you just work the problem. You just get back.
I get it. So there isn't a finite goal that you're trying to achieve. There's a goal in front of you, and you get on with it. And then there's this, you want to model something for your kids. I mean, I think the biggest mind shift for me when my son came into my life was that my sense of perspective shifted radically. You had one of those, what they call Copernican shifts. Yes. Do you know Copernican shift?
Yes.
So Copernicus said, no, the sun doesn't go around the earth, the earth goes around the sun. And it's a shift in perspective, not in physical reality.
No.
But it's such an amazing shift in perspective that everything changes, right? And so, like, my son coming into my life was one of those Copernican shifts in terms of my understanding of my place in the universe changed instantaneously. And it became more about that there's something I have to give, play it forward, they say. It was very much. And so, my current health gig, as you know, is motivated by a desire to be an active father as opposed to anything else. I don't want to be that dad that says to his son, you go off and play with your mates because I'm just don't have the path or the energy to do it. I want to be throwing him in the sea and jumping in after him and trying to save him. That's my job, right?
Yeah.
And I need to be active to do that. And it's that sort of thing. And he's very proud of that. And he sort of sees me.
You
and
can see that,
really
Noel. You can see it.
Yeah. And it's transformed things. And I feel sad. And you must have met these guys, but I feel sad for those guys that only see their kids as a burden and a problem and don't really want to get into this experience of parenthood and fatherhood, which is much more creative and generous, and I feel very sad for them, really. That they can't see that.
And look, it's I have another saying too. It's not a competition, right? You don't have to be a better person, a better dad. What you need to be, in my view, is to do the best that you're able to do.
That's right.
But to have that view that if you've chosen to be involved in their life, that you're going to not leave them with a wealth of assets, but you might leave them with a wealth of ideas, belief systems, attitudes, and that'll do them in good stead for them to meet the challenges through life. So
and that's, I guess, what's informed you as a leader as well. So, which is another parenting role, but you've been successful in all the fields that you've worked in. And you moved into healthcare for a while as well, which is how I met you. And again, so that really struck me about you. And there was a sort of simpatico or connection I felt when we met, because it was your approach was about it's all business and all that sort of stuff. And I've got a business mind as well. But it was actually about, what is the meaning and purpose of this work? Why am I here to do this work? And what is this work about? It seemed to me that was...
Sadly, my only brother is a dysfunctional alcoholic, and that's been an enormous challenge for my siblings. And Dad's passed, but Mum's still with us. She's now got Alzheimer's, so it's very difficult for her to grasp that side of it. But that was a big motivation for me to take up the opportunity when invited to turn around this drug and alcohol rehab business up in Thailand. And I suppose what struck me the most was the honest and fervent intent of the counsellors and the staff to help these people who have lost their way, versus the commercial and economic gain that the directors were looking to derive from the business. And when I arrived, I was horrified at some of the lack of standards or behaviours that were playing out. And I think that's where, when you and I met in London, that's where I felt we struck a chord, because I could see that, look, you're running a business and you need to provide yourself with a livelihood, but you've been there and done that, and you can talk with empathy as to how to help these people through this. And I felt that really there needed to be a greater commitment of care, and the question was always, would I be happy if one of my sons was in this facility?
Exactly. And that is the question, isn't it?
Yeah. And upon my arrival, I would have said, I'm not sending my son here. But it set me a challenge to try and turn things around and focus on their recovery. And my challenge as a CEO was to work out the economics of how best to do that, to make a return for the investors. But
that brings us nicely to my second point, which is that there's something very human and vulnerable about you, and that you've maintained that humanness through these sort of very serious high-ended business ventures that you've been on. And I mean, you've been a very senior person in your field. And it's a hard-nosed, money-based fields that you've been in, including this healthcare field. Yet somehow you've maintained a value-based, a human-based, a vulnerable, open, person-centered approach to all those things, while at the same time being very successful. Do you know where that comes from? Do you have a sense of why that is? Because it's the same story about successful businessman who's also a successful father, as in you've got a relationship to your sons, which a lot of successful businessmen don't have a relationship to their kids at all, to be honest.
Yeah. Look, I learned a lot from my dad, and I often say to my boys, this is something that I've learned from a dad, and I think it's valuable that you look at that and embrace that if you can. But I also learned a lot from what didn't happen or what was absent. And so an example there was, whilst Dad he and his twin brother were very successful in the small country town that they ran these businesses in. I grew up working in the business. I started working in it when I was 12 on the weekends and after school and all that sort of thing. But I observed that there was very little investment back into the people that worked for them, and in terms of training and development, etc. And that struck me because I didn't understand, because if you want to have a great business culture, if you want your customers to feel great about entering your store, then the first people they're going to bump into is your staff. And if your staff aren't feeling fulfilled, and it's not all about just making sure they're earning more pounds or dollars every week or every month. It's about them wanting to feel that they belong and that they're considered in the decision making. So I turned that around and I took that into my business. And when I was with this large American insurance company and I was the CEO for Thailand, the company did a global employee engagement survey, and I was proud that we came second, but we only came second by that much. And it was really because what we sat down and worked on was what is important to these people when they come to work every day. And in Thailand, the average wage is not significant, but it was all about the conditions that they worked within. They were crowded, they were lacking technology, we provided all of that. But then we created a lot of events to create camaraderie. And so I was really proud that they, when surveyed, they decided that they were really well looked after. And we spent a lot of time and money in developing their skills for those that wished to be. They had to be some commitment, involvement that they wanted to develop. So I think
leap the horse to water and all that. Yeah, that's right. But it seems like it's almost like what you're talking about. I don't know if this characterizes it appropriately, but you see yourself as being of service to people. You find where you are of service to people. Even if you're right at the top of the company, you're still of service to the people that are providing your products and services. And they are of service to the customers. But you seem to have that, if you like, that humility about your place, even as the top boss. And it was something I noticed and observed, the people around you in the context I observed you in, was that they quickly grew to respect and have warm emotional feelings towards you. They never thought you were a fool. Nobody ever thought you were a fool, I mean, I think some of the directors did, but they learned the hard way that you weren't, right? Because they were fools.
Yes.
That's the truth.
Yeah. Still are.
I know. It's like miracles are just slightly beyond us, right? But you're hard-nosed, successful. You know how to run a business and you know how to make a buck. But there's something about you which is open and warm and approachable. So nobody takes you for a fool unless they're a fool. but they also warm to you as a human being. And it's not fake with you, it's genuine. And it's not a sort of fake suntanny warmth. It really does seem to come from inside you, that it gives you something you seem to like it.
Yeah, look, it's I don't know, but that's just how it is. I recall years ago when I was working in Australia, I think it was in 1990, I was working with a health insurance fund, and I was heading up the corporate sales division. And I remember chatting to the head of marketing, and she said, "Oh, the CFO really doesn't take to you." And I said, "Oh, really? Why is that? I don't have a lot to do with him." Yeah. And she said, "Oh, he just doesn't like the way you walk around with a smile on your face all the time."
Right.
And it took me aback because I thought, well, that's an odd thing to not like someone about. But maybe it was growing up in the country, and
I don't know. It's not on the same level, but one of the ways I'm getting healthy is I go to my local yoga center, and I am that guy who smiles and talks to everybody. I'm the bloke who, when you see him get on the bus, you're thinking, "Don't sit next to me. Don't sit next." Like, oh no, he sat next to me. And it goes to all sorts of neurotic places of people liking and disliking, and I can see, I come into some of these classes and I can see some faces just go, "Oh shit, it's him," right?
Yeah.
And other faces just go, "Yeah, great, hello, how you do?" In fact, all the Aussies that come love me, I have to say. We're right So there's something about Australia, but it is that thing that it will trigger people if you're. The best piece of advice was ever given by a drama teacher at school, Mrs. Woods, that was her name. She said, "No, you don't have to be clever. You just have to be really straight and upfront with people. And then people will assume you're really clever."
Yeah.
And just be honest and upfront and authentic. Best piece of advice. You're on the show, not just because I miss you and it's great to have you back, but it's also because you're sort of wanting to highlight the work of fundraising and thinking about this book. So tell us what you're doing with the hospital right now and how people might be able to help it, if there's any links, what sort of services they're giving. Give us a bit more about this amazing hospital that I want to thank personally for saving my best mate's life. So, thank you very much for keeping Gary with us. So what are you on with them? What's going on?
So sorry, I'm just bringing up the link so I can quote that. So just bear with me there.
James will put it out there as well, so people can just on the stream.
Yeah. So the Alfred Hospital were the ones that conducted the surgery and said, "You've only got, if you don't have the surgery, go and suck on crushed ice. And if you do have the surgery, you may not wake up. And if you do wake up, you may not make 90 days. Yeah. But when I did wake up, that's when I said, look, this is amazing that I got to this point, that I've woken up, and I just feel compelled to give something back to other people who are going to go through this journey, because they weren't vigilant about sun protection. I clearly wasn't when I was in the 60s and 70s. So they're building a new cancer research centre, and so I've just decided to act as an ambassador of sorts and do whatever I can at different speaking events or I think we've got a promotion coming up in the next month or so where they'll basically provide an update on where I'm at from a health perspective, and I'll go through the journey of the last couple of years. And last year, when I had the myelitis attack, they didn't tell me this. They told my wife that if he didn't present himself at A&E when he did, he wouldn't have lasted 3 or 4 days. I didn't even know what myelitis was.
I still don't. I just know it wasn't very nice. I don't want it. That's what I know.
So anything I can do to give back and help develop further research and education awareness around.
And so James will put out a link to the hospital. Is it on the hospital site, or is it another site that you set up?
It's another site, but it all feeds directly back into the Alfred Foundation. Yeah.
Okay,
and,
so James has got those links. So folks, just look on the links that James is putting out, and people will be able to find out about it. Does that include your story, or is there another place that people can go to get your story?
No, that will include the story. Yep.
Okay. And people will be able to donate through that as well?
They can, yeah. All they have to do is to drop in the amount and obviously their credit card number, and that'll facilitate all of that. So look, just try and give something back, and they're a wonderful hospital, and I wouldn't be here without them. So we'll do what we can to help them.
And you're thinking now of writing a book?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's the sort of time scale on that? Because it's one I want to read, definitely. I'd like to hear your sort of philosophy of life and read about it.
Yes. Well, part of I'll Stop Living When I'm Dead is I'm going to be in Europe in mid-June. Kerry and I are taking one of the longboat cruises from Amsterdam down to Budapest.
Okay.
And then we'll go to Edinburgh and Glasgow, and then do the Lakes districts in the UK.
So we'll get to meet up. That'd be good. I'll get to take care.
Yeah. So after that, so I'm sort of looking at starting to bring things together around about September, and with a view that it'll probably be a first quarter next year release.
Great.
But I still need to convince myself that there's a story there that is going to be of value, and try and include maybe 10 lessons, you know, 10 things I've learned from the journey, and hopefully someone can take something away from that. And part of all of that will obviously go to the Alfred Foundation. So,
but also, I mean, it is an interesting subject for me. There aren't enough guys sort of out there, I don't think, sharing these stories in these ways. I mean, you do get the stories of heroic blokes who lose limbs climbing up a mountain and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it isn't necessary. I mean, they tend to be, again, in that sort of, you know, that version of manhood, which is okay. I'm sort of, you know, well, I chopped my arm off and then dragged myself through the bush for 3 weeks. Okay, I get that. I'm glad you made it. But it isn't, you know, what I identify with. What I identify with is blokes like yourself who maintain their integrated sense of self. That sounds like a highfalutin way of saying it, but all of you is functioning. It's not just an extreme sort of survival mechanism, survive at any cost. You know, from what I've heard for you tonight, it's important that your sons are involved, that your wife's involved, that the people that you care about are involved, that the hospital's involved, that people are brought on board. It's a team effort. It's a group effort. And you're in it because you want to be you, not some sort of weird caricature of you. You know, it's you that needs to survive as a person, and engaging with the quality of life. It's great to hear that you're still planning for the future, because I guess the tendency would be to sort of go, I don't really have a future, but
well, you know all the
future. That's
you know all the jokes.
Yeah,
all
sorry?
the jokes. No,
Yeah.
You know all the jokes. You know, I'm not going to buy green bananas, and I'll only get small tubes of toothpaste, right? Because I may not be here in a month, but you know, I don't subscribe to that. So
the truth is that we all have to come to terms with what we call this existential fact that we will stop existing at some point.
Exactly.
And it sounds like you've grasped that one, and the meaning you've taken from it is, okay, well, I don't know how long I've got, but I do have today, and I'm going to live because I will stop living when I'm dead.
Exactly.
That seems like a really sensible approach to life, whether or not you've got a cancer diagnosis, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. So make the most of it. And as I say, and if you hit a bump in the road, so to speak, then work the problem. You know, just don't don't turn the bump into a hole. Just work your problem as how to get around it and get on.
Well, look, Gary, it's been great to have you back. I hope that this can be used to help raise money for the hospital.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward. I hope we get to meet when you come over to Europe. That's on my cards to do that. Meet up with you and Kerry. I miss Kerry. She's good. She's a good egg. It'd be good to see her.
Good fun.
All right, you stay there for now. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody else. Goodbye, folks. It's been an amazing show. Good for me to have my mate Gary back and chatting about. He's still here, still alive and kicking, which is good. I've got no idea who we got next week because I never do. But goodbye for now, and I'll see you all next week. You stay there, Gary. Bye bye.